It's time to start your actual project, and if you haven't already, here's just the initial steps. So first thing you want to do is figure out a place on your computer that you want to actually work from and keep your local files. I'm just going to put mine on the desktop right now, which is completely empty, and make a new folder. I'm going to name it My Project. You will name it whatever your project is, right? So I usually use caps for my project folder, and then inside of Animate, we're going to go ahead and make a new file. And we do want to make sure that your presets are correct. The width should be 960, height should be 540, frame weight should be 30 frames a second. Go ahead and create it. HTML5 Canvas as well. And I personally like to change my stage to black rather than white. That's just a personal preference, so I don't have those pixels jumping out at me, but same difference, doesn't really matter. So from here, I'm going to just save this file. You go to File, Save, Command-S, whatever. And then I'm going to navigate to that folder I created, Desktop, My Project. Now I'll create an FLA. Now my preference doesn't really matter as long as you're consistent. My preference is I use caps in my folder names, and I keep non-caps for my file names, and in this case I might do my hyphen project, or I might do camel case and say my project. Usually with file names I'll keep a hyphen because that's kind of more web appropriate. The camel case is more as you're programming, when you're naming files and things and directories, it'll be on the web. Usually this is how Google likes it, with hyphens, but it doesn't really matter. So before I even do anything in Animate, I've created my project folder, saved my Animate file inside of it, which also has my recover file just because it's open, right? Now, the next thing I do is make an assets folder. This is really the only folder that I'm creating. All the other folders are going to get created for me. The images, sound, video if I have it, that HTML file, the JavaScript file, but this assets folder is for you to put in all your final graphics that you're going to be ready to start pulling in. That way, and again, you could have a completely different working environment to have like 100 revisions and different drafts up until your final assets. You don't need the entire road to get to the top of the mountain. You just need whatever your final graphics are in this folder, so that if you save your project, move it, give it to somebody else, whatever, it's always a good idea to keep all the final graphics and things that go into it all put together. So any kind of sounds, MP3s you want to go in here, PSD files, individual PNG files if you want to import them, images, any videos, MP4s that you'd want to go in here, put all that stuff in the assets before you import into the project. From there, that's all you really create as far as the directory structure. Now, the other big thing to do, which I do right away, if I just, if I run this in the browser right now, it's going to be up in the left corner, is let's set up the actual publish settings, all right? So if I go here and just click more settings next to the publish settings in the properties inspector, which should be open as long as I have nothing selected, and I have nothing in my file yet, so nothing selected. I'm going to set my settings, and I am going to go and check all three of these: center stage, make responsive, include preloader. I'm going to leave scale to fill visible area unchecked. By default, both of these are set to both, and what that does, hit OK. I'll open that back up in a second. Now all of a sudden my project is centered, and if I get smaller than the browser window on like a small phone or something, it'll actually shrink and letterbox appropriately for me like that. All right, so you just want to make sure you have those basic settings set. It's easy enough to open up in here. Just click these three that are unchecked on the outside, basically: center stage, make responsive, include preloader, which is going to give you this default little box thing. This would stretch it to fit the whole screen. For right now, you can leave that off. If you end up with like all vector graphics, you might want to use that. But for now, leave it off. As long as you have these settings, you should be good to go. I'm going to hit OK. And then, all right, so if we followed this, you've got a project directory to work in. Now all of a sudden it generated these other files as I looked at it in the browser, generated an image file and put my preloader in there, has my assets folder for me to put all my stuff in. And now the next part is a part where, understandably, a lot of people just blank and are like, oh, what do I do now? I just have this blank file. How do I start, right? You want to import your graphics. And when you import your graphics, you know, you can import a PSD. You could import multiple PSDs for different pages. You could import the same PSD multiple times with different pages in it, like organized. But ultimately, if you import a PSD, or even if you're just importing something from Illustrator, or if you drew stuff inside of here, you may end up with a ton of layers here as you import. And great, maybe you've got your first page here, and you can see it on the screen, but then what do? How do you get to your other pages, and how do you import stuff? So what I always recommend is, before you even import any graphics whatsoever, is set up your timeline and create some empty movie clips out of little colored rectangles to put all your stuff in. All right, and I'll show you what I mean really quickly. So I always just take this first layer and name it code, because you know that's the layer where you're going to have your frame labels and everything. And then I'll make a new layer under it, and let's call it pages. We're going to stick all those pages for now. So the first thing, I've got a couple of layers, is I have no space on my timeline, so I'm just going to go out to 100, just because that's about as far as my screen shows. I'm going to hit F5 to make some new frames. And now you're going to want to create some keyframes, just like we've done on all of our projects now, with frame labels, and decide what's what. So in my imaginary project I'm laying out right now, my very first frame is going to be a splash page. Maybe I'll name that splash. It'll be a start page, it'll be home or something like that. But for me, I'm going to call it my splash page. And then I'm going to go maybe a second down the line. A lot of times I'll just go like 10 frames, which is enough so I can see, but I'm only going to do a couple of them. So I'll go about a second down the line, make a keyframe. And I know here I'm going to have a home page. And then maybe I'll go to 60 here. And I know here I'm going to have perhaps what I'll call my main page, where all my crazy stuff is going to happen. And then finally, maybe on frame 90, I'll put another keyframe. And this will be, maybe I'll call this my credits. All right, so you can all imagine we have a splash page, a home page, a main page, and some credits. And then, so imagine maybe we've got 4 different layout looks to import into these different areas. And what I like to do, because, you know, if we just imported them all on this main timeline, then you're going to have to play the game of having all these layers, maybe organize them with folders. But with each page, you're going to have to kind of keyframe a bunch of elements in and out so they show up where you want them to show up. What I think the easiest way to do this is to leave your timeline nice and clean, your main timeline. You don't have to do it this way. If you feel very comfortable with laying things out, you know, feel free to do it however you want. There's 10 ways to do anything you want in this program, and as long as it looks right and it works, then it is right for the most part. I'm just going to do my best to kind of show you some best practices. So what I like to do is I'm actually going to put a keyframe under each of these. So what I like to do is I like to actually create a movie clip, like kind of a blank one, just out of a rectangle on each page, and get it set up and positioned and ready to go. So I'm going to choose the rectangle tool. I don't need a stroke. I just need a fill color. I'm going to choose a different color every time. So this time I'll choose this color. And it makes 0 difference how big it is. I'm just going to draw a little box here. And what I like to do, you can either use the align panel, or you can use the actual position and size area of the properties panel and set it to 0, 0. All right, so it's stuck in the upper left corner. I'll explain that in a moment. And now I'm just going to make a movie clip out of it. F8. And I'm going to make sure my registration point, instead of being in the center, is at the upper left. This is the first time I've kind of told you guys to do that. Usually I leave the registration point in the center when I create a graphic, because it just, or a movie clip or a button, because it just seems to be easier when I'm laying things out and using the align panel. It works a little better that way. But when I'm creating a movie clip that I know I'm going to import artwork into, I always go upper left, because that's the way it imports. All right, so if I go upper left, now all of a sudden I have this movie clip that is sitting in the upper left of the stage, and it's even though you can see this little center circle, the actual registration point's in the upper left. And now I could go inside of this, and I could just import all of my graphics into this movie clip for that specific page, And even if it's 100 layers, then they're all going to kind of be contained within here, and my main timeline will still be good to go. And once you import your graphics, as long as they're the right size, 960 by 540, they should import from the upper left corner, and you should see them just there filling up your screen all nicely on your layers and everything. And then once everything's imported, you could go ahead and delete this layer 1 that has the rectangle on it because you don't need it anymore. So usually what I'll do is go ahead, I could keyframe these and duplicate the symbol each time, but I'm just going to draw it kind of freehand. I usually do it this way because they're different colors. And each time, it's going to use a different color, draw a different box, might be a different shape, doesn't matter. I'm going to make a movie clip out of it, doesn't matter what I do this. I'll leave that. Actually, what I should have done, here, I can go back to my library. The first one, instead of just leaving it symbol 1, I'm actually going to name it Splash. So I like to name my movie clips and match the name to the actual spot where it is on the timeline. That can be helpful. So that was this one. And then now my home one, I'm going to make a movie clip, F8, name this home. Make sure it's upper left, got it. And now maybe I'll go to the properties, set this X and Y to 0 and 0. And now I have this page ready to import. So I'll throw these two together real quickly. Choose a different color. Whoa, that's bright. And this one's going to be my main. This time maybe I'll open the align panel, align it to the upper left. And then finally my credits. I'll choose one more. This nice purpley color, draw it out. You see how quickly I'm just kind of blocking this out. And credits there, align it again, 0, 0, and poof, now I'm ready to go. Now I can go ahead and go inside of my splash page, import my PSD with those particular graphics on it. Again, if you have one PSD that has kind of everything in it, you can turn layers on and off to import things, just what you want at a time. Retain all your layers, retain all your graphics and everything. And then you can delete this layer 1 with a box on it once you're done. And I could go into each individual page and import all of my graphics from that particular section of the PSD or from a different PSD. Or if you used Illustrator, you can actually copy and paste graphics. And you might want to create your own layers one at a time to set that up. Usually kind of the two ways. Or if you're just building things inside of this, then you might want to kind of organize it a different way, cut and paste things, copy and paste layers, that type of thing. But that's kind of it. A lot of students I know have a trouble kind of thinking of how to start, how to begin. Like, okay, what do I do now? And this is usually the process I go with, is just set up the folder, set up the files, get everything in the right spot, get your assets in here, and then lay out your main timeline and figure out what your main different layouts are going to be, create a movie clip for each one, or just have them all on there and organize them by layers and keyframes, but just make sure that as you go from page to page, you can see things change. And that's usually a pretty good starting spot. You can get all your graphics in, and I would concentrate on getting all of your graphics in there before you necessarily make anything work. Just kind of get everything in so you can thumb through and see your pages change. And then at that point, when you have everything organized, organize your library. You know, if you got a bunch of stuff you imported, kind of, name things appropriately, or throw all your imports into a single imports folder or something. That's something I'll keep an eye on. I'll have you guys always kind of show me your library and keep things organized as much as possible. And, then just start working away. Once you have all your graphics in there, then see if you can get from your first page to your second page. See if you can make that first button work.